The dust devil spun across the empty Texas highway like a ghostly dancer, and Maya Chen watched it through her cracked windshield with the kind of numbness that comes after your entire world implodes in a single afternoon. Her ancient Toyota Camry wheezed and sputtered, steam rising from under the hood in lazy spirals that seemed to mock her situation. The engine had been making that grinding noise for the past 40 miles, and now, on this desolate stretch of Highway 6 between nowhere and nothing, it had finally given up the fight. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed, because tomorrow, I've saved something extra special for you. The diamond on her left hand caught the late afternoon sun, sending tiny rainbows across the dashboard. 3 carats of lies and broken promises. She should have thrown it at him along with everything else, but somehow, in the chaos of discovering her fiancé David wrapped around her sister Emma in their bed, she'd forgotten she was even wearing it. Now it felt like a chain around her finger, heavy with the weight of a future that would never exist. In the passenger seat, her golden retriever mix Bruno whimpered softly and shifted his weight carefully. His left rear leg had been giving him trouble for weeks, the result of an old injury that the vet said would never fully heal. The limp made him cautious, vulnerable in a way that mirrored her own emotional state. His warm brown eyes met hers in the rearview mirror, full of the kind of unconditional love that made her throat tighten with unshed tears. The highway stretched endlessly in both directions, a ribbon of scorched asphalt cutting through the heart of ranch country. To her left, barbed wire fences marked the boundaries of properties so vast she couldn't see their ends. To her right, the same endless expanse of grass and scrub brush, punctuated occasionally by the distant silhouettes of oil derricks pumping steadily against the horizon. The landscape was harsh and unforgiving, but there was something honest about its emptiness that appealed to her raw nerves. Maya pulled her phone from the cup holder and stared at the screen. No signal, of course. She was probably 60 miles from the nearest town, with a dead car and a limping dog, wearing the same clothes she'd fled Houston in 12 hours ago. The irony wasn't lost on her. 6 months ago, she'd been planning the perfect wedding, designing invitations, choosing flowers, imagining the life she and David would build together. Now she was stranded in the middle of nowhere, with nothing but a dog, a suitcase, and the crushing realization that everything she'd believed about her life had been a carefully constructed lie. The sound of hoofbeats on pavement made her look up from her phone. At first, she thought the heat was making her hallucinate, but the rider was real enough. He approached at an easy lope, sitting his horse with the kind of natural grace that spoke of a lifetime in the saddle. The man was tall and lean, his face shadowed by the brim of a well-worn black Stetson. As he drew closer, Maya could make out weathered features that suggested he was somewhere in his 30s, with the kind of deep tan that came from working under the Texas sun year after year. His horse was a beautiful paint mare, black and white patches gleaming in the afternoon light. The animal moved with the fluid confidence of a working ranch horse, responding to subtle shifts in her rider's weight and posture. They made an impressive pair, this cowboy and his mount, like something out of a movie or a romance novel. Maya almost laughed at the thought. Her life had definitely taken a surreal turn if she was being rescued by an actual cowboy. The rider pulled up alongside her car and touched the brim of his hat in a gesture that was purely old-fashioned courtesy. When he spoke, his voice had the slow, measured cadence of someone who never wasted words. "Engine trouble?" Maya rolled down her window, suddenly aware of how she must look. Her long black hair was pulled back in a messy ponytail, and she could feel the dried tracks of tears on her cheeks. The professional makeup she'd worn to the office that morning was long gone, leaving her face bare and vulnerable. "I think it overheated," she said, her voice hoarse from crying. "Or maybe something worse. I'm not really sure." The cowboy nodded and dismounted with fluid grace, ground-tying his horse with the kind of confidence that spoke of perfect training. He was taller than she'd expected, probably 6'2" or 6'3", with broad shoulders and the lean build of someone who did physical work for a living. His jeans were faded and worn, his boots scuffed and practical. Everything about him spoke of authenticity, from his calloused hands to the way he moved with economical purpose. "Mind if I take a look?" Maya nodded and popped the hood. Steam billowed out immediately, and the cowboy stepped back with practiced caution. When the worst of it had cleared, he leaned in to examine the engine. his hands moving with the confidence of someone who understood machinery. Maya watched him work, noting the concentration on his face, the way his fingers traced connections and hoses with gentle precision. "Your radiator's shot," he said finally, straightening up and meeting her eyes. "And from the sound she was making, I'd guess you've got other problems too. Transmission, maybe. Or the engine block itself." Maya's heart sank. How much would that cost to fix? The cowboy studied her face for a moment, taking in the exhaustion and defeat written there. His eyes were green, she noticed. The color of sage grass after rain. They were kind eyes, but careful, as if he'd learned to be cautious with his trust. "More than this old girl's worth, I'm afraid," he said gently. "You got somewhere you need to be." The question hung in the air between them like heat shimmer on asphalt. Maya felt Bruno's weight shift against her leg, his warm presence, the only constant in her suddenly upended world. She looked at the cowboy, this stranger who'd appeared out of nowhere like something from a different century, and found herself telling the truth. "Not really," she said, the words bitter on her tongue. "I was just driving, trying to get away from Houston." The cowboy was quiet for a long moment, his gaze moving from her face to Bruno, who had limped out of the car and was now sitting patiently beside her. She watched him take in the details. Her expensive clothes that looked wrong in this rural setting, the suitcase visible in the back seat, the way she held herself like someone who'd been hit and was still reeling from the blow. "I'm Ryan Martinez," he said finally. "I run a ranch about 10 miles up that road." He pointed toward a dirt track that branched off from the highway, disappearing into the distance. "Lost my ranch hand last month when he decided to follow his girlfriend to Dallas. Been trying to manage everything myself, but it's more work than one person can handle." Maya's pulse quickened, though she tried not to let hope creep into her voice. "Are you offering me a job?" "I'm offering you a place to stay and 3 meals a day in exchange for help around the ranch," Ryan said carefully. "It's hard work, and the pay isn't much, but you'd have your own quarters and all the time you need to figure out what comes next." His eyes moved to Bruno, who was struggling to stand on his injured leg. "Your dog's welcome too, long as he doesn't chase my cattle." The offer felt like a lifeline thrown to someone drowning in the middle of the ocean. Maya looked at Bruno, who seemed to sense the importance of the moment and gave his tail a tentative wag. The dog had always been a good judge of character, and something about this quiet stranger seemed to pass his test. "I don't know anything about ranch work," Maya said honestly. "I've been working in marketing for the past 5 years. I wouldn't even know where to start." "Most things can be taught to someone who's willing to learn," Ryan replied. "Question is, are you willing?" Maya thought about David, about the life she'd planned that had crumbled in the space of an afternoon. She thought about the apartment in Houston that she could never go back to, the job she'd probably lost when she'd walked out without explanation, the friends who would inevitably take sides. She thought about the wedding that was supposed to happen in 3 months, the dress hanging in her closet, the deposits that were probably non-refundable. All of it felt like someone else's life now, like a movie she'd watched but hadn't really lived. The only real thing was the weight of Bruno against her leg and the steady presence of this cowboy who'd appeared when she needed him most. "Yes," she said, the word carrying all the desperation and hope she could muster. "I'm willing to learn." Ryan nodded once, a gesture that somehow managed to convey both approval and a kind of quiet welcome. "Storm's coming in," he said, glancing at the horizon where dark clouds were beginning to gather. "We should get your things and head to the ranch before it hits." As Maya gathered her few belongings from the car, she felt something she hadn't experienced in hours, the faint stirring of possibility. Bruno hobbled excitedly around her legs, his limp more pronounced with his enthusiasm, but his spirit clearly lifted by the prospect of movement, of purpose, of somewhere to go. Ryan loaded her suitcase into the bed of his pickup truck with the easy strength of someone accustomed to physical labor. His truck was an older Ford, probably 15 years old, but well-maintained, with the kind of practical modifications that spoke of real work. A toolbox in the bed, heavy-duty tires, a CB radio mounted on the dashboard. "We'll have to come back for your car later," he said as he helped Bruno into the cab. The dog settled between them with a sigh of relief, clearly grateful to be off his feet. Might be able to sell it for parts. Get you something for your trouble. Maya nodded, though the prospect of salvaging anything from her old life felt strange and somehow wrong. She wanted to leave it all behind, to start completely fresh without any reminders of the person she'd been that morning. The woman who'd driven away from Houston in tears felt like a stranger now, someone weak and naive who'd believed in fairy tales and happy endings. As Ryan started the truck and pulled onto the dirt road that led to his ranch, Maya found herself studying his profile. He had strong features, made more interesting by the small scar that cut through his left eyebrow and the lines around his eyes that spoke of years spent squinting into bright sunlight. His hands on the steering wheel were broad and capable, with the calluses that came from rope work and manual labor. "What kind of ranch do you run?" she asked, as they bounced along the rutted road. The landscape around them was harsh but beautiful in its own way, all golden grass and endless sky. "Cattle, mostly," Ryan replied. "About 500 head of Angus and Hereford cross. Some horses, too, though not as many as my grandfather kept. The market's not what it used to be." Maya nodded as if she understood, though the numbers meant nothing to her. She'd grown up in suburban Dallas, the daughter of 2 accountants who'd never owned anything larger than a golden retriever. Her experience with animals was limited to Bruno and the occasional visit to the zoo. "How long have you been ranching?" "All my life, really. This place has been in my family for 3 generations. My grandfather started with nothing but a dream and a willingness to work 18-hour days, built it up from a few hundred acres to nearly 10,000. There was pride in Ryan's voice, but also something that might have been burden. When he died 5 years ago, I inherited the whole operation. Sometimes I wonder if I'm doing right by his legacy." The vulnerability in his admission surprised Maya. This man who seemed so competent and self-assured had his own doubts, his own fears about living up to expectations. It made him seem more human, more approachable. The ranch revealed itself gradually as they drove deeper into the property. First came the gates, heavy steel painted in the distinctive Martinez brand. Then the fencing, miles of it stretching in all directions, marking boundaries and separating pastures. Finally, the buildings began to appear. A large metal barn, several smaller outbuildings, and in the distance, the main house. The house was a surprise. Maya had expected something rustic, maybe a log cabin or a simple frame structure. Instead, she found herself looking at a beautiful 2-story home built of native stone and timber, with a wraparound porch that seemed to invite lingering. It looked solid and permanent, rooted in the landscape as if it had grown there naturally. "It's beautiful," Maya said, meaning it. "My grandmother's design," Ryan replied with obvious affection. "She said a house should look like it belongs to the land, not like it was dropped there by accident. Took my grandfather 3 years to build it, working evenings and weekends when he wasn't tending cattle." As they pulled up to the house, Maya could see other buildings scattered around the property. A bunkhouse that had probably once housed multiple ranch hands, a workshop filled with equipment she couldn't begin to identify, and what looked like a small guest cottage nestled beneath a grove of pecan trees. "That's where you'll be staying," Ryan said, pointing to the cottage. "It's got running water and electricity, a small kitchen and a bedroom. Nothing fancy, but it's private and comfortable." Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. He glanced at Bruno, who was beginning to pant in the heat. "There's a good-sized yard, too, fenced so your dog can't wander off and get into trouble with the cattle." The cottage was perfect, Maya thought, as Ryan showed her around. It was small but well-appointed, with knotty pine walls and furniture that looked handmade but sturdy. The kitchen was compact but functional, with a gas stove and a refrigerator that hummed quietly in the corner. The bedroom was simple, just a double bed with a colorful quilt and a dresser that looked like it had been built to last a century. "Bathroom's through there," Ryan said, indicating a door off the bedroom. "Water heater's propane, so you shouldn't have any trouble with hot water. Phone's on the kitchen counter if you need to make any calls." Maya nodded, though she couldn't think of anyone she wanted to call. Her parents were on a cruise in the Mediterranean, blissfully unaware of the catastrophe their daughter's life had become. Her friends would want explanations she wasn't ready to give. And David could rot in hell for all she cared. "I'll let you get settled," Ryan said, pausing at the door. "Come up to the main house around 6 for dinner. We can talk about what your responsibilities will be, and I'll introduce you to the work schedule." After he left, Maya stood in the center of the small living room and tried to process what had happened. This morning, she'd been a successful marketing executive with a corner office and a six-figure salary. Tonight, she was a ranch hand in training, living in a cottage in the middle of nowhere, Texas, with nothing but a limping dog and the clothes on her back. She should have felt terrified, lost, completely out of her depth. Instead, she felt something she hadn't experienced in years, a sense of freedom. For the first time in her adult life, no one expected anything of her. She didn't have to be the perfect daughter, the successful career woman, the devoted fiancé. She could just be Maya, whoever that turned out to be. Bruno had found a sunny spot on the rug and was already settling in for a nap, his injured legs stretched out carefully in front of him. The dog had always been adaptable, quick to make himself at home wherever they landed. Maya envied him that quality. She'd always been a planner, someone who needed to know what came next, who felt safe only when she had everything mapped out months in advance. Now she was living minute by minute, hour by hour, with no idea what tomorrow would bring. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like the first deep breath she'd taken in months. The cottage had a small front porch with two wooden chairs that looked out over the ranch. Maya settled into one of them and watched the sun begin its descent toward the horizon. In the distance, she could see cattle moving slowly across a pasture, dark shapes against the golden grass. A hawk circled lazily overhead, riding the thermals with effortless grace. The silence was profound, broken only by the occasional lowing of cattle and the whisper of wind through the grass. After years of living in the city where the noise never stopped, the quiet felt like a balm to her frayed nerves. She could almost feel her shoulders begin to relax, the tension that had been her constant companion for months finally starting to ease. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and Maya looked at it with something approaching dread. David's name appeared on the screen, along with a text message that made her stomach clench with anger. "Baby, where are you? Emma told me what happened. It's not what you think. We need to talk." Maya stared at the message for a long moment, feeling rage build in her chest like a physical thing. The casual way he called her baby, as if nothing had changed. The suggestion that she'd somehow misunderstood what she'd seen with her own eyes. The implication that this was something they could work through, like a minor disagreement about where to go for vacation. Without allowing herself to think about it, Maya deleted the message and then blocked David's number. Then she turned off the phone entirely and set it on the table beside her chair. Whatever happened next, she was done being manipulated by people who claimed to love her while betraying her in the worst possible ways. The sun was lower now, painting the sky in shades of orange and pink that seemed to set the whole landscape on fire. Maya had never seen anything so beautiful, so vast and untamed. In Houston, the horizon was always crowded with buildings, the sky cut into squares by skyscrapers and power lines. Here, the world felt infinite, full of possibilities she'd never even dreamed of. At 5:30, she went inside to clean up for dinner. The bathroom mirror showed her a woman she barely recognized, face bare of makeup, hair loose and tangled from the wind, eyes that looked older and sadder than they had that morning. But there was something else there too, something that might have been strength. She'd always been the responsible one, the girl who colored inside the lines and followed all the rules. She'd graduated summa cum laude from college, landed a good job straight out of school, worked her way up the corporate ladder with determination and long hours. She dated appropriate men, saved money for retirement, bought insurance and mutual funds and all the things that responsible adults were supposed to do. And where had it gotten her? Engaged to a man who was sleeping with her sister behind her back, living a life that felt like a beautifully decorated prison cell. Maybe it was time to stop being responsible. Maybe it was time to find out who she really was when no one was watching, when there were no expectations to meet or rules to follow. The walk to the main house took her past several outbuildings she hadn't noticed before. A chicken coop bustled with activity as the birds settled in for the night. A vegetable garden showed neat rows of plants she couldn't identify. Everything spoke of self-sufficiency, of a life lived close to the land and the natural rhythms of the seasons. Ryan answered the door before she could knock, as if he'd been watching for her. He'd cleaned up too, she noticed, trading his work clothes for clean jeans and a button-down shirt that brought out the green in his eyes. His hair was still damp from the shower, and she caught a whiff of soap and something else, something clean and masculine that made her stomach flutter unexpectedly. "Come on in," he said, stepping aside to let her pass. "Hope you're hungry. I'm not much of a cook, but I can manage the basics." The inside of the house was as impressive as the exterior, with high ceilings and exposed beams that gave it a sense of spaciousness. The furniture was comfortable rather than fancy, built for durability and daily use. Family photos covered the mantelpiece, showing generations of Martinez men and women against the backdrop of the ranch. "Your grandmother was beautiful," Maya said, studying a wedding photo that showed a young woman in a 1940s dress standing beside a tall man in a military uniform. "She was," Ryan agreed, joining her at the mantel. "Smart as a whip, too. She's the one who convinced my grandfather to diversify, to raise horses along with cattle. Said putting all your eggs in one basket was a fool's game." His smile was soft with memory. "She died when I was 16, but I still hear her voice sometimes when I'm making decisions about the ranch." Dinner was simple but delicious. Grilled steaks, baked potatoes, and green beans from the garden Maya had noticed. They ate at a wooden table that looked like it had been handmade, probably by the same grandfather who'd built the house. The conversation was easy, comfortable in a way that surprised Maya. Ryan was a good listener, asking questions that showed he was genuinely interested in her answers. She found herself telling him about her job in marketing, about the campaigns she'd developed for various clients, about the satisfaction she'd found in solving complex problems with creative solutions. She didn't mention David or the wedding that would never happen, but Ryan seemed to sense the pain beneath her careful words. "What made you decide to leave?" he asked, as they finished their meal. Maya considered lying, giving him some sanitized version of the truth that wouldn't make her sound like a victim or a fool. But something about his steady presence, the way he listened without judgment, made her want to be honest. "I came home early from a business trip," she said, staring down at her plate. "Found my fiancé in bed with my sister. They'd been having an affair for months, apparently. Everyone knew except me." Ryan was quiet for a moment, and when Maya looked up, she saw something like anger flash in his green eyes. "I'm sorry," he said simply. "That's a hell of a thing to come home to." "The worst part is that I think I knew," Maya admitted. "Deep down, I mean. There were signs, little things that didn't add up, but I ignored them because I wanted so badly for everything to be perfect. I was so invested in the idea of the life we were going to have together that I couldn't see what was actually happening." "That doesn't make you a fool," Ryan said firmly. "That makes you someone who loved deeply and trusted completely. The failure wasn't yours." The kindness in his voice almost undid her. She'd been so angry at herself for missing the signs, for being the last to know about her own betrayal. But Ryan's words offered a different perspective, one that didn't require her to carry all the blame. "I just need some time to figure out who I am when I'm not trying to be what someone else wants," she said. "Does that make sense?" "Perfect sense," Ryan replied. "Sometimes the best thing you can do is start over completely, build something new from the ground up." After dinner, Ryan walked her through what her daily responsibilities would entail. The ranch ran on a strict schedule, he explained, with work beginning before dawn and continuing until well after sunset. Maya would be responsible for helping with the cattle, maintaining fences, and assisting with whatever projects needed attention. It was physical work, demanding and often dirty, but Ryan promised to train her properly and never ask her to do anything unsafe. "The most important thing is that you're willing to learn and not afraid of hard work," he said as they stood on the front porch, watching the last light fade from the sky. "Everything else can be taught." Maya nodded, though part of her wondered what she'd gotten herself into. She'd never done manual labor, never worked with large animals, never lived without the conveniences of city life. But something about the challenge appealed to her. The idea of using her body as well as her mind, of creating something tangible with her own hands. "There's one more thing," Ryan said, and something in his tone made her look at him more closely. His eyes had moved to her left hand, where David's engagement ring caught the porch light. "The work we do here requires trust, complete honesty between partners. I can't have someone on my team who's still tied to their past, still looking backward instead of forward." Maya's heart began to beat faster as she realized what he was saying. "Are you asking me to take off my ring?" I'm saying that if you want to stay, if you want to build something new here, you need to leave the old life behind completely. Ryan's voice was gentle, but firm. That ring represents promises that were broken, a future that was never real. As long as you're wearing it, you're still carrying that weight. Maya looked down at the diamond that had once represented everything she'd wanted. 3 carats of perfection that had turned out to be as false as the man who'd given it to her. The weight of it suddenly felt unbearable, like a shackle binding her to a past she desperately wanted to escape. "Stay," Ryan said quietly, and the word hung between them like a challenge and a promise. "But only if you're ready to let go completely?" Maya's hands were shaking as she twisted the ring off her finger. It came free easily, as if it had never really belonged there. For a moment, she held it in her palm, feeling its weight, remembering the day David had proposed on the beach in Galveston. How happy she'd thought they were. Then she handed it to Ryan, who took it without question and slipped it into his shirt pocket. "I'll put it somewhere safe," he said, "in case you ever change your mind." But Maya knew she wouldn't. Standing there on the porch of a ranch house in the middle of nowhere, with the night sky stretching endlessly overhead and a limping dog waiting for her in a cottage that was already beginning to feel like home, she felt lighter than she had in years. The ring was gone, and with it the last chain binding her to a life that had never really been hers. "Thank you," she said, and meant it more than she'd ever meant anything. Ryan nodded, understanding passing between them without need for words. Tomorrow would bring new challenges, hard work, and the beginning of a transformation she couldn't yet imagine. But tonight, she was exactly where she needed to be, free, unencumbered, and ready to discover who Maya Chen really was when no one else was defining her. As she walked back to her cottage, Bruno limping faithfully beside her, Maya felt something she hadn't experienced in months: hope. The future was uncertain, full of questions she couldn't answer, and challenges she'd never faced. But for the first time in her adult life, that uncertainty felt like freedom instead of fear. The cottage welcomed her back with warm light and the promise of a fresh start. Tomorrow she would begin learning to be a ranch hand, to work with her hands and care for animals, and build something real and lasting. Tonight, she would sleep without the weight of broken promises on her finger, without the burden of someone else's expectations on her shoulders. She was Maya Chen, and she was finally free to discover what that meant. The rooster's crow pierced through Maya's sleep at 4:30 in the morning, dragging her from dreams of city traffic and conference rooms into the stark reality of ranch life. She lay in the unfamiliar bed for a moment, disoriented by the absolute darkness outside her window and the profound silence that followed the bird's announcement. In Houston, there was always noise, always light seeping through the curtains from street lamps and passing cars. Here, the night was complete and honest, holding secrets she was only beginning to understand. Bruno stirred on his makeshift bed beside her, a pile of old blankets Ryan had provided. The dog's internal clock seemed more attuned to ranch rhythms than her own, and he lifted his head with alert ears, ready for whatever the day might bring. His limp was more pronounced in the mornings, she'd noticed, the old injury stiffening during sleep, but his enthusiasm never dimmed. Maya dressed quickly in the work clothes Ryan had suggested she purchased during their trip to town the previous afternoon. The jeans were stiffer than anything she'd ever worn, the boots heavy and unforgiving on her feet. She felt like she was wearing a costume, playing dress-up as someone she wasn't sure she could become. The woman who had stepped out of a disabled car 3 days ago seemed like a stranger now, someone soft and unprepared for the reality of physical labor. The main house showed warm light in the kitchen windows, and Maya could smell coffee brewing as she approached with Bruno at her side. The dog moved more slowly in the early morning, favoring his good leg, but his tail wagged with anticipation. He'd taken to ranch life with the adaptability that dogs possessed, finding joy in new scents and spaces while maintaining his unwavering loyalty to Maya. Ryan was already dressed and ready for work when she knocked on the kitchen door, his movements efficient and practiced as he prepared for the day ahead. He looked like he'd been awake for hours, though Maya suspected he'd risen only minutes before her. There was something about him that suggested he never needed time to transition from sleep to full alertness, as if he was always ready for whatever demands the ranch might make. "Morning," he said, handing her a steaming mug of coffee. "Sleep well?" Maya accepted the coffee gratefully, wrapping her fingers around the ceramic warmth. Better than I expected. It's so quiet here at night. Take some getting used to if you're from the city, Ryan agreed. But most people find they sleep deeper once they adjust. Something about the clean air and honest exhaustion. They ate breakfast in comfortable silence. A meal of eggs from Ryan's chickens, and bacon from a pig he'd raised himself. Everything had a richness of flavor that Maya had never experienced. Food that tasted like it had grown from the very soil beneath their feet. She was beginning to understand that ranch life was about connection, about understanding where things came from and how they all fit together in the larger cycle of seasons and survival. As the first pale light began to creep across the horizon, Ryan led her toward the barn where the real work would begin. The building was massive, built to house equipment and hay and provide shelter for animals during harsh weather. The scent hit her immediately, a mixture of hay and leather and something earthy that she was learning to associate with cattle. It wasn't unpleasant, just different from anything in her previous experience. First thing we do every morning is check the herd, Ryan explained as he loaded supplies into the back of a utility vehicle that looked like a cross between a golf cart and a small truck. Count heads. Look for any animals that seem sick or injured. Make sure the water systems are working properly. Maya climbed into the passenger seat, Bruno settling carefully on the floor between her feet. The utility vehicle moved with surprising smoothness across the rough terrain, its wide tires designed for navigating pastures and creek beds. As they drove, Ryan pointed out landmarks and explained the layout of the ranch, how the different pastures were rotated to prevent overgrazing, where the best grazing was located during different seasons. The cattle were scattered across a pasture that seemed to stretch to the horizon, black and red shapes moving slowly through grass that was still wet with morning dew. They were beautiful animals, Maya realized, much larger than she had expected but with an unexpected gentleness in their movements. A few lifted their heads to watch the approaching vehicle, but most continued their methodical grazing, focused on the serious business of converting grass into the protein that would eventually feed families across the country. 537 head, Ryan said after they'd completed their circuit of the pasture. All accounted for and looking healthy. That big bull over there is Maximilian. He's the king of this particular castle, and he knows it. Maya followed his gaze to a massive black animal that stood apart from the others, his presence commanding even from a distance. There was something regal about the way he carried himself, aware of his importance in the hierarchy of the herd. She found herself thinking that animals seemed to understand their roles in ways that humans often struggled with, accepting their place in the natural order without the constant questioning that plagued people like herself. The morning progressed with a series of tasks that Ryan performed with the efficiency of long practice. They checked water tanks and salt licks, examined fence lines for damage, and loaded hay into feeders scattered throughout the pasture. Each job required different skills, and Maya found herself fumbling with tools and techniques that seemed simple when Ryan demonstrated them but proved challenging when she attempted to replicate his movements. "Don't try to muscle it," Ryan said as Maya struggled with a particularly stubborn gate latch. "Everything on a ranch works better with finesse than force." The animals respond to calm confidence, and the equipment lasts longer if you work with it, instead of against it. The advice proved applicable to more than just gate latches. When they moved to the horse pasture to check on the dozen quarter horses Ryan kept for working cattle, Maya learned that her city reflexes were all wrong for dealing with large animals. She approached the horses with the same brisk efficiency she'd used in business meetings, and they responded by moving away from her, sensing her tension and uncertainty. "Breathe," Ryan said simply, standing beside her as a beautiful sorrel mare studied them from across the fence. "Animals read energy before they read intention. If you're tight and worried, they'll be tight and worried too." Maya forced herself to slow down, to soften her movements and quiet her mind. The change was almost magical. The sorrel mare approached cautiously, her nostrils flaring as she took in Maya's scent. When Maya extended her hand slowly, palm up, the horse sniffed delicately before allowing herself to be touched. The contact was electric, a connection that bypassed all of Maya's analytical thinking and spoke directly to something deeper. "Her name is Cinnamon," Ryan said softly. "She was my grandmother's favorite. Gentle as a lamb, but smart as a whip. She's getting older now, probably 15 years old. but she still knows more about working cattle than most people ever learn. Maya stroked the horse's neck, marveling at the warmth and strength beneath the smooth coat. Cinnamon's eyes were dark and intelligent, and Maya had the unsettling feeling that she was being evaluated by a creature whose judgment mattered in ways she was only beginning to understand. The horse seemed to approve of whatever she saw, lowering her head to accept the attention with regal grace. The rest of the morning was spent repairing a section of fence that had been damaged by fallen tree branches during the previous week's storm. Maya had never used tools more complex than a screwdriver, but Ryan proved to be a patient teacher, showing her how to stretch wire properly and secure it with the right tension. The work was harder than anything she'd ever done, requiring strength she didn't know she possessed and skills she'd never needed in her previous life. By the time they broke for lunch, Maya's hands were blistered, despite the work gloves Ryan had provided, and her back ached from bending and lifting. But there was something deeply satisfying about the fence they'd repaired, something tangible and useful that would stand long after the discomfort faded. She was beginning to understand the appeal of work that produced visible, lasting results. "You did good this morning," Ryan said as they sat on the porch of the main house, eating sandwiches made from leftover roast beef. "Most city people get frustrated when things don't come easy. You stuck with it." Maya felt a flush of pride that was entirely different from the satisfaction she'd derived from successful marketing campaigns. This praise was based on effort and persistence, rather than cleverness or creativity, and somehow it felt more honest, more deeply earned. "I have a lot to learn," she said, examining her blistered palms. "Everyone does when they start. The ranch has its own way of teaching, if you're willing to listen." Ryan's eyes moved to Bruno, who was sleeping in a patch of shade, his injured legs stretched out in front of him. "How long has he been limping?" "About 6 months. The vet said it was an old injury that never healed properly. Nothing that can be done now except manage the pain." Maya's voice carried the worry she'd been trying to hide. Bruno was getting older, and she could see the limp becoming more pronounced, especially after long periods of activity. Ryan was quiet for a moment, studying the sleeping dog with a thoughtful expression. "I've got some experience with animal injuries. Mind if I take a look at him?" Maya nodded, curious about this new facet of Ryan's knowledge. She'd been learning that ranch life required a person to be part veterinarian, part mechanic, part meteorologist, and part psychologist. Self-sufficiency wasn't just preferred on a ranch this isolated, it was essential for survival. Bruno submitted to Ryan's examination with the patient tolerance that characterized his approach to most things. Ryan's hands moved over the dog's leg and hip with gentle competence, his touch causing no distress even when he probed areas that Maya knew were tender. Bruno actually seemed to relax under the attention, his tail giving a lazy wag of approval. "It's an old break that didn't set properly," Ryan said finally. "Probably happened when he was young, maybe before you got him. The good news is that he's adapted well, and the muscles around the injury have compensated. He's not in as much pain as you might think." Relief flooded through Maya. She'd been carrying guilt about Bruno's condition, wondering if she was asking too much of him by bringing him to a ranch where he'd need to be more active than their sedentary city life had required. "There are some things we can do to help him," Ryan continued. "Swimming is excellent therapy for this kind of injury. There's a stock pond about a mile from here that's perfect for it. And I know some exercises that can help strengthen the supporting muscles." The offer was given casually, but Maya understood that it represented something more significant than simple veterinary advice. Ryan was making a commitment to Bruno's well-being, acknowledging that the dog was part of whatever was developing between them. The gesture touched her in ways that grand romantic gestures never had, perhaps because it spoke to care rather than conquest. The afternoon brought a different kind of challenge when Ryan announced that it was time for Maya to learn to ride. The prospect terrified her more than she wanted to admit. She'd been around horses for less than a week, and the idea of actually climbing onto one seemed like an enormous leap of faith. "Cinnamon is perfect for beginners," Ryan assured her as he led the sorrel mare from the pasture. "She's got the patience of a saint and more common sense than most people. She'll take care of you." The process of saddling the horse was complex and precise, requiring attention to details that could mean the difference between a pleasant ride and a dangerous accident. Ryan showed Maya how to check that the cinch was properly tightened, how to adjust the stirrups for her height, how to hold the reins with just the right amount of contact. Each step built on the previous one, creating a system of safety that had been developed over centuries of partnership between humans and horses. Mounting was perhaps the most intimidating moment of Maya's life. The stirrup seemed impossibly high, and Cinnamon, though only average-sized for a quarter horse, looked enormous from ground level. But Ryan's steady presence and Cinnamon's patient stillness gave her confidence, and suddenly she was in the saddle, looking out over the ranch from an entirely new perspective. The view from horseback transformed everything. What had seemed like manageable distances on foot now revealed themselves as vast spaces that would take hours to cross. The cattle scattered across the pasture looked smaller and more vulnerable, and Maya began to understand why cowboys had needed horses to manage such enormous territories. This wasn't just transportation, it was a partnership that had made civilization possible in places like this. Cinnamon's first steps were careful and measured, responding to Ryan's voice commands rather than any signals from Maya. The motion was unlike anything Maya had experienced, a rolling rhythm that required her to find a new kind of balance. She gripped the saddle horn with white knuckles, fighting the urge to tense every muscle in her body. "Relax," Ryan said, walking alongside them. "Trust her. She knows what she's doing, even if you don't." Gradually, Maya began to understand what he meant. Cinnamon was making decisions about where to step and how fast to move, navigating obstacles and uneven ground with the wisdom of long experience. Maya's job wasn't to control every aspect of the ride, but to communicate her general intentions and trust the horse to handle the details. They spent an hour in the arena behind the barn, Ryan teaching Maya the basics of steering and stopping, how to use her legs and weight to communicate with the horse, rather than relying solely on the reins. It was like learning a new language, one that required her entire body, rather than just her voice. By the end of the lesson, Maya was beginning to feel the rhythm of Cinnamon's movement, to anticipate the horse's responses to different signals. "You're a natural," Ryan said as they unsaddled Cinnamon in the barn. "Most people fight the horse the first few times. You're learning to work with her, instead of against her." Maya felt a glow of accomplishment that was becoming familiar. Each small success on the ranch felt disproportionately important, perhaps because it represented mastery over fears and limitations she'd never had to confront in her previous life. She was discovering capabilities she'd never known she possessed, finding strength and coordination that had been dormant beneath years of desk work and urban living. Evening chores were a revelation in their own way. Maya learned to collect eggs from chickens that regarded her with suspicious eyes, to milk the 2 goats Ryan kept for his own consumption, to check that all the animals were secure for the night. Each task connected her more deeply to the rhythms that governed ranch life, the endless cycle of care and responsibility that kept the operation functioning. Dinner was another shared meal, this time with Maya contributing vegetables she'd harvested from Ryan's garden under his careful supervision. The tomatoes and peppers had a flavor that seemed to carry the essence of the soil they'd grown in, rich and complex in ways that grocery store produce never achieved. She was beginning to understand that everything on the ranch was connected, part of a web of relationships that sustained both the land and the people who worked it. "You've done well today," Ryan said as they cleaned up after the meal. "Better than I expected, if I'm being honest. Most people who come from the city struggle with the physical demands." "It's different from anything I've ever done," Maya admitted. "But I like the way it feels to work with my hands, to see immediate results from effort." In marketing, success was always measured in abstractions, numbers on spreadsheets and demographic analyses. This feels more real somehow. Ryan nodded, understanding. "My grandfather used to say that a man should be able to look at what he's accomplished at the end of each day and see something tangible. Fixed fence, healthy animals, crops in the ground. Something that makes the world a little better than it was that morning." They walked together toward Maya's cottage as the sun set behind the distant hills, painting the sky in shades of orange and purple that seemed almost too vivid to be real. Bruno limped along beside them, tired from his first full day of ranch exploration, but clearly content with his new environment. The dog had found several favorite spots during the day, including a sunny corner of the barn where he could watch the activities without getting in the way. "Thank you," Maya said as they reached her porch. "For everything. The job, the patience, the chance to start over." "Everyone deserves a second chance," Ryan replied. Question is what you do with it once you get it. As Maya settled into her cottage for the night, she reflected on how much had changed in just one day. Her muscles ached in places she'd forgotten she had, her hands were rough and stained from honest work, and she felt more tired than she had after the longest days at her corporate job. But there was something deeply satisfying about the exhaustion, a sense that she'd earned her rest through meaningful effort. The days that followed established a pattern that became increasingly comfortable as Maya's body adapted to the demands of ranch work. She rose before dawn without needing an alarm, her internal clock adjusting to the rhythms that had governed rural life for centuries. The work grew easier as her muscles strengthened and her skills improved, though Ryan continued to present new challenges that pushed her beyond her comfort zone. She learned to drive the large tractor that Ryan used for cutting hay, fighting her initial terror of the massive machine to discover the satisfaction of working efficiently across broad fields. The view from the tractor seat was magnificent, offering perspectives on the ranch that she couldn't achieve from ground level. She began to understand how the different fields related to each other, how the rotation of crops and grazing supported the long-term health of the land. Working with the cattle became less intimidating as Maya learned to read their body language and predict their movements. The animals had distinct personalities, she discovered, from the curious young steers who approached any new activity with bold investigation, to the cautious older cows who preferred to observe from a distance before making judgments. She found herself looking forward to the daily cattle checks, enjoying the peaceful interaction with creatures whose needs were simple and honest. Ryan proved to be an excellent teacher, patient with her mistakes but never patronizing in his corrections. He had a way of demonstrating techniques that made complex tasks seem manageable, breaking down complicated procedures into steps that Maya could master one at a time. More importantly, he seemed to understand when to push her toward new challenges and when to allow her time to consolidate skills she'd already learned. The relationship between them was evolving in ways that Maya found both exciting and terrifying. There was an undeniable attraction, awareness that seemed to grow stronger with each shared task and quiet conversation. But there was also something deeper developing, a partnership based on mutual respect and shared purpose that felt more substantial than romantic infatuation. Ryan had his own vulnerabilities, Maya was learning. He carried the weight of responsibility for the ranch with a seriousness that sometimes made him seem older than his years. Late at night, she sometimes saw lights on in the main house office where he worked on accounts and planning, managing the business side of the operation that was every bit as demanding as the physical labor. "The ranch has been losing money for the past 3 years," he admitted one evening as they sat on his porch after a particularly long day. "Cattle prices are down, feed costs are up, and the big corporate operations can undercut anything I can do on volume. Some days I wonder if I'm fighting a losing battle." The confession surprised Maya with its honesty. Ryan had seemed so competent, so in control of his environment, that she hadn't considered the financial pressures he might be facing. She was beginning to understand that ranch life, for all its apparent simplicity, involved complex calculations and risk management that would challenge any business executive. "What keeps you going?" she asked. "This land has been in my family for 3 generations, Ryan said, his voice carrying the weight of legacy. "My great-grandfather came here with nothing but determination and a willingness to work harder than anyone thought possible. My grandfather built it into something that could support a family and provide jobs for others. I can't be the one who lets it all slip away." Maya understood that burden in ways she hadn't expected. Her own family had worked hard to give her opportunities they'd never had, and she'd always felt the pressure to justify their sacrifices through her success. The difference was that her achievements had been measured in salary increases and corporate recognition, while Ryan's were measured in the health of the land and the animals that depended on him. "Maybe the answer isn't to do the same things better," Maya said thoughtfully. "Maybe it's to do different things that create new sources of income." Ryan looked at her with interest. "What do you mean?" Maya felt her marketing instincts awakening. The analytical skills she'd developed over years of identifying opportunities and solving problems. "You've got something here that can't be replicated by corporate farms. Authenticity. Connection to the land. People in cities are hungry for experiences that feel real, that connect them to where their food comes from." The idea that had been forming in the back of her mind began to crystallize as she spoke. Agritourism was becoming increasingly popular, she explained, as urban dwellers sought experiences that offered escape from digital overwhelm and artificial environments. Ranch stays, cattle drives, hands-on farming experiences, all of these represented potential revenue streams that could supplement traditional ranching income. You could offer week-long programs where people learn actual ranch skills, Maya continued, her excitement building. Not just trail rides and barbecues, but real work. Helping with cattle drives, learning to repair fences, understanding how a working ranch operates. People would pay well for the privilege of doing what I've been learning to do. Ryan was quiet for a long moment, considering the possibilities. It would mean having strangers on the ranch regularly, changing the whole character of the place. It would mean the ranch could survive and thrive, Maya countered. And you'd be sharing something valuable, teaching people skills and perspectives they can't get anywhere else. The conversation continued late into the evening, with Maya sketching out marketing strategies and revenue models, while Ryan considered the practical implications of turning his working ranch into an educational destination. It felt natural to be planning together, to be combining their different skills and perspectives in service of a shared goal. As the weeks passed, Maya found herself thinking less about her previous life and more about the future she was building on the ranch. Houston seemed like another world, populated by people whose concerns felt increasingly foreign to her new reality. The constant connectivity that had once seemed essential now felt like a distraction from more important things, like watching the way light changed across the pastures at different times of day, or noticing the subtle signs that indicated changes in weather patterns. Bruno was thriving in the ranch environment, his limp becoming less noticeable as his overall fitness improved. Ryan had been true to his word about helping with the dog's therapy, taking them to the stock pond several times a week where Bruno could swim in the warm water. The exercise was clearly beneficial, and Maya was touched by Ryan's consistency in making time for the dog's needs, despite his demanding schedule. The swimming sessions became a highlight of Maya's week, offering a chance to see Ryan in a more relaxed state as he waded into the pond with Bruno, encouraging the dog to swim longer distances with patient persistence. Bruno loved the water, his natural retriever instincts making him a strong swimmer despite his injury. Watching him paddle happily across the pond, Maya felt a contentment that seemed to settle into her bones. "He's getting stronger," Ryan observed one afternoon as Bruno emerged from the water and shook himself vigorously. "Look at how he's carrying himself, more confident, less favoring of that leg." Maya nodded, grateful beyond words for Ryan's investment in Bruno's well-being. The dog was more than just a pet to her. He was the one constant that had carried her through the collapse of her previous life. Seeing him happy and healthy in this new environment felt like a validation of all the difficult choices she'd made. As autumn approached, Maya realized that she'd been on the ranch for nearly 2 months. The time had passed with a speed that surprised her, measured not in calendar days but in skills mastered and relationships deepened. She could now handle most ranch tasks independently, and Ryan had begun trusting her with responsibilities that would have terrified her when she first arrived. The work was changing her physically, as well as emotionally. Her hands had developed calluses that protected them from rope burns and rough surfaces. Her shoulders had broadened from lifting and carrying, and her endurance had increased dramatically. She moved with more confidence now, her body adapted to the demands of outdoor labor and large animal handling. More importantly, she was changing internally. The constant anxiety that had characterized her city life had largely disappeared, replaced by a kind of steady calm that came from living in harmony with natural rhythms. She slept deeply and woke refreshed, her mind clear and focused on the day's tasks rather than churning with worry about things beyond her control. One evening, as she sat on her cottage porch watching the sunset paint the hills in brilliant colors, Maya realized that she hadn't thought about David or her former life in days. The betrayal that had once felt like a mortal wound had faded to a dull ache, overwhelmed by the richness of her present experience. She was becoming someone new, someone stronger and more authentic than the woman who had fled Houston in tears. Ryan appeared at the edge of her yard, leading Cinnamon with a purposeful stride that suggested he had something specific in mind. "Feel like taking a ride?" he asked. "There's something I want to show you before it gets dark." Maya had progressed far beyond the basic arena lessons of her first week, and riding had become one of her greatest pleasures. Cinnamon had accepted her completely, responding to her signals with the kind of partnership that made them feel like a single entity. The trust between them had grown gradually, built through consistent contact and mutual respect. They rode toward the eastern boundary of the ranch, following a trail that Maya had never explored. The path wound through stands of oak trees and across small creeks, climbing gradually toward higher ground. As they rode, Ryan pointed out features of the landscape that told the story of the land's history, from ancient creek beds to the remnants of homesteads that had failed during particularly harsh years. Their destination was a ridge that offered a panoramic view of the entire ranch spread out below them. From this vantage point, Maya could see the full scope of the operation, from the cattle scattered across distant pastures to the cluster of buildings that formed the ranch headquarters. The scale was breathtaking, a reminder of the responsibility that Ryan carried and the legacy he was fighting to preserve. "My great-grandfather brought my great-grandmother here when they were deciding whether to buy this land," Ryan said as they sat their horses on the ridge. "Family legend says she took one look at this view and told them they'd found home." Maya understood the feeling. Looking out over the ranch as the last light faded from the sky, she felt a connection to the land that transcended anything she'd experienced in her previous life. This wasn't just a place where she worked, it was becoming a place where she belonged, where her efforts contributed to something larger and more enduring than herself. "Ryan," she said, turning to face him in the gathering dusk, "I need you to know something. When I came here, I thought I was just running away from a bad situation. But I found something I didn't even know I was looking for." His eyes met hers in the fading light, and Maya saw understanding there, along with something that might have been hope. "What's that?" "Home," she said simply. "A place where I can be who I really am, where the work I do matters, where I can build something that will last." She paused, gathering courage for what she wanted to say next. "I don't want this to be temporary anymore. I want to be your partner in every sense of the word." The silence that followed stretched between them like the vast sky overhead, full of possibility and promise. When Ryan finally spoke, his voice carried the weight of careful consideration and deep feeling. "Maya," he said, "I was hoping you'd say that, because I can't imagine this place without you anymore. You've become part of everything that matters here." As they rode back toward the ranch in comfortable silence, Maya felt the last pieces of her old life finally falling away. She was no longer Maya Chen, the marketing executive who had lost her way. She was Maya Chen, rancher, partner, a woman who had found her strength in the vast spaces and honest work of rural Texas. The future stretched ahead of her like the endless sky, full of challenges and possibilities she was finally ready to embrace. The autumn air carried the promise of winter as Maya watched the sunrise paint the eastern horizon in shades of amber and rose. 6 months had passed since that desperate afternoon when her car had broken down on Highway 6, and the woman who stood in the ranch yard now bore little resemblance to the heartbroken executive who had fled Houston with nothing but a limping dog and shattered dreams. Her hands, once soft and manicured for board meetings, now bore the honest calluses of rope work and fence repair. Her body had grown strong and lean from months of physical labor, moving with the confident grace of someone who understood her place in the rhythms of ranch life. Most importantly, her heart had healed in ways she'd never thought possible, strengthened by work that mattered and love that had grown as naturally as grass after spring rain. Ryan emerged from the barn carrying feed buckets, his movements efficient in the crisp morning air. The sight of him still made her pulse quicken, but now it was accompanied by the deeper satisfaction of true partnership. They had become a team in every sense, their individual strengths complementing each other in ways that made the ranch more successful than either could have managed alone. "Storm's coming in tonight," Ryan said, setting down the buckets and joining her to watch the sky. "Radio says it could bring the first hard freeze of the season." Maya nodded, her weather reading skills now nearly as developed as his own. She could see the signs in the way the cattle were clustering near the windbreak and the restless behavior of the horses. The animals always knew before the humans did, their instincts attuned to changes in barometric pressure and wind patterns that spoke of approaching weather systems. "I'll make sure the stock tanks have heaters ready," she said, already mentally organizing the preparations needed to protect the animals through what might be their first serious test of winter. The responsibility felt natural now, as much a part of her as breathing. They worked together through the morning with the synchronized efficiency of a partnership that had been tested by countless challenges and proven strong. Maya handled the cattle check while Ryan prepared equipment for hay delivery, both of them moving with purpose toward the common goal of ensuring every animal on the ranch would be safe and comfortable through the approaching storm. The agritourism program they had launched in September was already exceeding their most optimistic projections. Maya's marketing background had proven invaluable in identifying their target audience and developing programs that appealed to urban professionals seeking authentic experiences. They offered week-long intensives in ranch management, weekend retreats for families wanting to understand where their food came from, and specialized programs for corporate groups looking for team-building experiences that challenged participants in meaningful ways. The first group of guests had been nervous city dwellers who arrived with inappropriate clothing and unrealistic expectations about ranch life. By the end of their week, they were confidently handling cattle and repairing fences, their faces glowing with the satisfaction of accomplishing things they'd never imagined possible. The transformation was exactly what Maya had predicted, and the word-of-mouth marketing from satisfied guests was already bringing in bookings for the following year. The Henderson Group wants to book a return visit for next fall, Ryan said as they shared lunch on the porch, reviewing the morning's email responses. Said their son hasn't stopped talking about wanting to be a cowboy since they got home. Maya smiled, remembering 8-year-old Tommy Henderson's determination to learn everything about ranch life in the span of a single weekend. The boy had shadowed Ryan everywhere, asking endless questions and absorbing information with the intensity that only children could bring to subjects that captured their imagination. That's the 4th repeat booking this month, she noted, updating their reservation calendar. We might need to consider expanding the guest facilities if this trend continues. The success of their business partnership had been matched by the deepening of their personal relationship. What had begun as mutual attraction had evolved into something much more substantial, built on shared values and complementary strengths rather than romantic fantasy. They challenged each other to grow while providing the support needed to take risks and push boundaries. Ryan had enrolled in online business courses to better understand marketing and financial planning, while Maya had begun studying for her real estate license to help other families who wanted to transition from urban to rural life. They were building something together that was larger than either of them individually, a vision of sustainable agriculture combined with education and community building. Bruno had become the unofficial mascot of their guest programs, his gentle nature and inspiring recovery story touching everyone who met him. The swimming therapy had worked better than Maya had dared hope, and while he would always have a slight limp, he moved with confidence and obvious contentment. Guests often commented on the special bond between Maya and her dog, seeing it as evidence of the authentic care that characterized everything about the ranch. The approaching storm required preparation that went beyond normal daily routines. Maya and Ryan spent the afternoon moving cattle to sheltered areas, checking that water systems were protected from freezing, and ensuring adequate food supplies were available in locations the animals could access regardless of weather conditions. The work was demanding, but Maya found satisfaction in the competence she'd developed over months of learning to anticipate and respond to the ranch's needs. As evening approached, they completed a final check of all systems, their coordination so smooth it seemed choreographed. Maya handled the livestock while Ryan secured equipment and supplies, both of them working against the dropping temperature and increasing wind that announced the storm's arrival. By the time they finished, the first snowflakes were beginning to fall, carried on gusts that promised a serious weather event. Everything's secure, Ryan said as they stood in the barn, brushing snow from their coats. The animals have shelter and food, the pipes are wrapped, and the backup generator is ready if we lose power. Maya nodded, but her attention was caught by something else entirely. Throughout their relationship, they had been building toward moments of deeper commitment, conversations about the future that had grown more specific and detailed, as their partnership proved itself through daily challenges. Tonight felt different, charged with possibility that went beyond storm preparation. Maya, Ryan said, his voice carrying a seriousness that made her look at him directly, there's something I want to talk to you about. He reached into his coat pocket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Maya's heart skip several beats. But when he opened it, instead of the traditional diamond engagement ring she might have expected, she found something much more meaningful. The ring was a simple band of white gold, set with a small emerald flanked by 2 tiny diamonds, beautiful in its understated elegance. This was my grandmother's wedding ring, Ryan said, his voice gentle but steady. She told me once that it should go to a woman who understood that marriage was about building something together, not just finding someone to complete you. Maya felt tears prick her eyes as she understood the significance of what he was offering. This wasn't just a proposal of marriage, it was an invitation to become part of a legacy that stretched back generations, to take on the responsibility of carrying forward something important and enduring. "I know we haven't known each other long by traditional standards," Ryan continued, "but we've been through more together than most couples experience in years. We've built a business, survived challenges, learned to work as a team. I can't imagine facing the future with anyone else." The snow was falling harder now, visible through the barn windows as fat flakes that caught the light from the overhead fixtures. Maya could hear the wind beginning to howl around the building's corners, the storm arriving with the intensity Ryan had predicted. But inside the barn, surrounded by the quiet presence of animals and the warmth generated by months of shared work, she felt perfectly safe and completely certain about what she wanted to say. "Yes," she said simply, extending her left hand toward him. "Yes to all of it. The marriage, the partnership, the future. We're building together." The ring slipped onto her finger, as if it had been made for her, fitting perfectly in a way that felt like destiny rather than coincidence. Maya held up her hand to admire it, thinking about how different this moment was from David's ostentatious proposal in an expensive restaurant with a ring chosen more for its size than its meaning. This ring carried history and promise, representing not just romantic love but the practical commitment to build something lasting together. Ryan's kiss was gentle but thorough, carrying months of restrained attraction and the deeper emotion that had grown between them through shared challenges and mutual respect. When they finally broke apart, Maya felt as if something fundamental had shifted in the universe, as if all the pieces of her life had finally clicked into their proper places. The storm raged through the night, bringing temperatures well below freezing and accumulating several inches of snow before dawn. Maya and Ryan woke to a transformed landscape, everything covered in pristine white that sparkled in the early morning sunshine. Their preparations had been thorough, and a quick check revealed that all the animals had weathered the storm comfortably, grateful for the shelter and food that had been provided. "First real test of winter," Ryan said as they stood on the porch, drinking coffee and surveying their domain. "Everything held up perfectly." Maya nodded, but her attention was focused on something more significant than successful storm preparation. They had proven themselves as partners through every kind of challenge the ranch could present, from daily maintenance to crisis management to long-term planning. The engagement ring on her finger felt like official recognition of what they had already become through months of shared effort and growing trust. The weeks that followed brought a steady stream of preparations for their Christmas wedding. Maya had insisted on a simple ceremony at the ranch, conducted in the main house with only family and close friends present. The elaborate wedding she had planned with David seemed like someone else's dream now, artificially complex and focused more on impression than meaning. Her parents arrived from their extended European trip, initially concerned about their daughter's dramatic life change, but quickly won over by Ryan's quiet competence and obvious devotion to Maya's happiness. Her mother was particularly charmed by the story of Bruno's recovery and the role he had played in bringing Maya and Ryan together. "I never saw you this relaxed when you were with David," her mother confided as they worked together in the kitchen, preparing food for the small reception. "You always seemed like you were trying to be someone else, someone you thought he wanted you to be." Maya understood what her mother meant. With David, she had been constantly performing, trying to maintain an image of success and sophistication that had required enormous energy to sustain. With Ryan, she could simply be herself, whether that meant mucking out stalls in old jeans or dressing up for dinner in town. He loved all versions of her because he understood that they were all authentic expressions of who she really was. The wedding ceremony took place on a crisp December afternoon with the entire ranch family in attendance. The guest list included not only human friends and relatives, but also the animals that had become central to Maya's new life. Bruno served as ring bearer, carefully carrying the simple gold bands in a small pouch attached to his collar, his dignified bearing earning applause from the assembled guests. Maya wore a simple ivory dress that allowed her to move freely, practical boots that would serve her well in ranch conditions, and her grandmother-in-law's wedding ring alongside the gold band Ryan placed on her finger during the ceremony. She had never felt more beautiful or more completely herself than she did standing in the living room where she and Ryan had shared so many quiet evenings, promising to build a future together. The reception was a potluck affair with everyone contributing dishes that reflected the community they had built around the ranch. Neighbors brought homemade bread and locally raised beef. Guests from their agritourism programs sent wine and specialty foods from their home regions, and Maya's family provided traditional dishes that honored her heritage. The celebration felt authentic and joyful, focused on relationships rather than elaborate displays. As the evening wound down and guests began to drift away, Maya and Ryan found themselves alone on the porch, where they had shared so many important conversations. The ranch stretched out before them under a canopy of stars so brilliant they seemed close enough to touch, and Maya felt the deep contentment that came from being exactly where she belonged. "Any regrets?" Ryan asked, echoing the question he had posed regularly throughout their courtship. Maya looked at the ring on her finger, thinking about the journey that had brought her to this moment. 6 months ago, she had been a different person entirely, defined by a job that provided security but not satisfaction, and engaged to a man who had never really seen her clearly. The woman who had broken down on Highway 6 had been lost and desperate, with no idea of her own capabilities or what she really wanted from life. Now she was a rancher, a business owner, a partner in every sense of the word. She had discovered strengths she never knew she possessed and built something meaningful with her own hands. Most importantly, she had found love that was based on genuine compatibility and shared values rather than fantasy and wishful thinking. "Only one," she said, reaching over to take Ryan's hand. "That it took me so long to find my way here." Ryan's smile was visible even in the starlight, warm and understanding, and full of the quiet confidence that had first drawn her to him. "You got here exactly when you were supposed to," he said, echoing words he had spoken months ago. "Right when we both needed each other most." As they sat together in comfortable silence, watching the night sky and listening to the peaceful sounds of animals settling in for sleep, Maya felt the future stretching ahead of them, like an adventure waiting to unfold. There would be challenges ahead, certainly, from market fluctuations to weather disasters to the thousand small crises that characterized ranch life. But she was no longer afraid of uncertainty, having learned that she was capable of adapting to whatever circumstances arose. The ranch hummed around them with the contentment of a place that was well managed and deeply loved. In the distance, cattle moved slowly through moonlit pastures, and Maya could hear the soft sounds of horses shifting in their stalls. Bruno was curled up on his favorite rug, his injured legs stretched out comfortably, his breathing deep and regular with the sleep of complete security. Everything was exactly as it should be, Maya realized. She had traveled a long road from heartbreak to healing, from uncertainty to confidence, from a life that looked perfect on the surface to one that was genuinely fulfilling in its depths. The woman who had fled Houston in tears had been transformed by honest work and authentic love into someone she was proud to be. Tomorrow would bring new challenges and fresh opportunities, but tonight was perfect in its simplicity and promise. Maya Martinez had found her way home at last, to a place where her efforts mattered and her heart was safe, where the future stretched ahead like the vast Texas sky, full of stars and infinite possibilities. Up next, you've got 2 more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hit the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out.